G'day folks, thank you for joining this webinar this morning. It's titled Making Content Available to the Remote Workflow. My name is Brian Ahern. I'm the CEO at Evolphin, and I'm joined by Rahul Bhargava, who is the founder and the CTO here at Evolphin. Now, the goal today is to share best practices based on technological facts for how you can make content available to the remote workflow. It sounds pretty easy, but in this case, the devil is very much in the detail. You're going to notice that our perspectives will probably differ from, from other perspectives in the industry, and we hope you enjoy the perspectives. The webinar is being recorded. And if you've got any questions, which we would encourage you to ask, there is a panel at the bottom where you can add your questions for me, and I'll make sure that Rahul or myself will answer those. And we will answer those questions at the end of the call. So welcome, we're grateful that you're here, and we're really excited to do this. I'm going to give you a very brief overview about the company. We've been around for since 2007. We've got a lot of customers. We're very proud of what we do, and we focus on enterprise software. We provide media production and collaboration solutions. We're based in the Silicon Valley. We've got customers all over the world. We've got a very broad partner network, and we're really happy with who and what we are. Very motivated to do what we do. We are a three-in-one solution. We're a DAM, we're a MAM, we're a PAM. We are a work-in-progress solution. And we really do provide a very effective way to ingest your content, to manage it, and to distribute the content, any type of content. We are 100% cloud-based. However, some customers want on-premise solutions, and some customers want hybrid type deployments. We can do the lot. We really don't care about hardware. We are completely agnostic. And we deal with some really, really exciting target markets: video and entertainment, advertising, manufacturing, healthcare, and sports. So we're going to share some facts with you this morning. We're excited that you're here. We're grateful that you've made the time. And Rahul, I'd like you to pick it up, please, and run through the materials.
Thank you, Brian. This is Rahul Bhargava, CTO of Evolphin. So today, what I'm going to do first is lead you through how do you get your content in and out of your various storages, exchanging that with external partners, freelancers, basically the entire remote workflow that you might have. And as part of that, I'll go through some slides. I'll show you some live demo of the product. And then towards the end of this webinar, I'm going to talk about what not to do. So it's great to talk about best practices and recommendations on what to do, but it's important for the audience here today to avoid pitfalls that exist. So that'll be covered towards the end of the session. So please stay with me till the end. All right, so let's get started. So this is a very common picture that customers see. They deal with ingest from multiple devices, locations that could be home or office. And today, the fact is that it requires a lot of jumping through a lot of hoops to get the content from here and there. And so customers are looking for a unified solution that covers all these bases, whether the content is in a field in a camera card or on a personal drive at home or various NAS and SANs at office, or partners that are exchanging content directly through perhaps cloud. Now, as customers start to look at solution, they come across vendors that will say they support cloud, but they actually discourage customers from copying anything high-res into the cloud. And that's no good. Or they might come across solutions where it is cloud only, and it is customers' problem on how to get tons of archive data, terabytes and petabytes into their cloud. And often these are called bring your own storage, bring your own cloud storage. And that is not easy, because how do you get all this massive content in the first place before you can take advantage of cloud computing? There are solutions that will ask you to work with third-party file acceleration products. So those of you who are not familiar with these products. There are many in the marketplace, and they are basically data mover. They move content from one remote location to another, require additional licensing, and are very difficult and challenging to use when used in conjunction with a map. The other challenge is it's great to talk about remote workflows, but what about the cost, especially in the cloud? Now, customers don't realize that if you're working with a solution that is not cloud native, where the provider is not a SaaS provider, then there is no incentive for the solution provider to control the cost. And with us, since we are a SaaS provider, that is key to our offering. So for example, we have designed a system of hubs that allow all these various storage silos to be interconnected. So we can drop a hub anywhere. If you are in an office situation with lots of storage silos, SAN or NAS, this accelerated hub from Evolphin can run in a server. If you're working with a Mac or Windows PC from home, you could have this hub run on your home desktop. If you're in the field, it could run in the laptop that you might have. And if you are a partner with the customer, you can have the hub talk with the cloud storage directly. And what that does is it reduces the cost of transfers. There are a lot of technical details here that customers are often not aware, like egress cost. The storage tiers in the cloud have varying cost. So for example, Amazon S3 might be 10 times cheaper than a block storage like EBS, but often you don't really care about this, you don't really know about this till you get a huge fat bill from AWS. So Amazon probably hates us because we have minimized a lot of these costs, and through this webinar, you will see how we have done that. Okay, moving on. So I've talked about the hub. This is the key to a lot of the high-res transfer workflows that we have. And this hub basically is designed as a background component that runs on your machine and will break up large media files in the background and transfer them in chunks to the cloud or wherever the endpoint is. No Aspera, no Signiant needed, unlike other solutions. And the most important point is this is designed to deal with interrupts. There are so many solutions that talk about copying content to the cloud, but if you look deeper, they can deal with things like resuming from PC going to sleep, or there's an internet outage or a power outage, or your battery runs out. What happens to that transfer if you are copying 100 gigabyte and you were at 80 gigabyte and an interrupt happens? So that's what the Evolphin Hub does. So rather than talk about it, let's look at the product in action. So I'm going to open up our asset browser here that basically gives you a view to all the asset. And that while there are many different ways of ingesting, we'll pick one of the more simpler ways. So let's say I wanted to get some content into one of the folders that you see through this interface. So I wanted to get this ocean documentary material into, let's say, the travel promo folder. I can drag and drop. And as I do that, the system will automatically recognize the high-res media that exists there. The images, everything would be collected, metadata form would show up, and if I hit check-in, it will start a background transfer. And that background transfer would be monitored by our hub. So this is an example of a hub that is running on your local computer. And this is part of our solution. You don't need to buy any third-party product, and it'll basically track all the transfers, how much time it's going to take. And even if I shut down my computer and wake it up, the hub would automatically pick it up. So it's basically as easy as you just drag your camera card or high-res media and let the hub do its business. So going back to my presentation here. So once you have the hub transferring the content to the cloud, there are a lot of background workflows that kick off on the cloud. For example, you might set it up to transcode proxies, you might set up AI engines to extract metadata, or you might have backup to a deep cold storage like Amazon Glacier, which is a fraction of the cost of normal storage. So all of those automations are triggered as part of a normal ingest. I showed you one way of ingesting, which is drag and drop. We support many different ways of ingesting. You can even set up a hot folder where somebody just drops content like a Google Drive and have the content then go get uploaded into the cloud. Now, this is great for creatives who are working with desktop. What about remote workers? What about freelancers? So that's where our web client comes in. And with the web client, I'm just going to go to that, you have the ability to bring content from anywhere. So a lot of times browsers have limitations of how much file data can you transfer, like often with typical browsers, 2 to 4 gigabyte. After that, they start to choke. And you will see with this workflow how we can overcome that. So say you were trying to bring 300 gigabyte or even 10 terabytes from somewhere, you can use a function we have called upload from URL, and that allows you to pick content from anywhere in the world through a URL bucket that we have set up. So say you wanted to bring content from Singapore, you could just select that region. All these parameters can automatically be configured, and the destination in the cloud MAM is set up. And when I hit upload, it would ingest all this massive content from Singapore to an edge location that Amazon has in that region. And then once the content makes it to the edge location, it will be accelerated using a backbone that operates at 10 gigabits per second to wherever your MAM is. Now, this entire workflow seems very simple, but you'll be surprised how many solutions do not provide a way to easily get your content. They make it your problem to get it into the right bucket and supply them with the bucket. But with Evolphin, we will set up all these policies to manage the egress cost. So even if the bucket is in Singapore, we can set it up in such a way that there are no extra charges for the customers. So this is great for bringing in content, but what about if I wanted to share out content with partners? If I wanted to download, so for that also, there is a very easy workflow. You don't need anything other than a web client. You can go into option here, select the content. Let's say these were the high-res media files that I wanted to share out. You can select files or folders. All you have to do is click on share, and at that point, you can choose how do you want to share this. So one of the options is to share it through Amazon S3. You can have signed links sent to the content directly to folks. So this is great if you have, let's say, 100 elements or files that you wanted to transfer. You can just say use Zoom S3. But what if there was a partner involved and they had their own bucket into which they wanted to get things delivered? So you can go and select the bucket where you need to put the content in, and say I wanted to send this to someone in Tokyo. And once you do that, you click send, and Evolphin will automatically orchestrate a high-speed transfer to move all that content from wherever it is in Zoom to the specific region that you have selected, Tokyo. And the user will basically then get an email confirming that they have the content in Tokyo, and they can easily download that from the nearest edge server in Tokyo. So this is how we make it very easy to manage transfers in and out of Evolphin. All right, so moving on to the next feature. Now, this is probably one of our most useful feature. It's called front-end deduplication. And we're probably the only MAM that truly supports front-end deduplication. You will hear other solution provider talk about deduplication, but they're probably not being honest, because deduplication often is in the context of storage. So if you have on-prem storage, you can go and deduplicate the blocks. What that means is if I have tons of files and maybe there were duplicates, the storage can run some backend job to check which blocks are similar and essentially store pointers so that the backend storage is compacted. But that's actually a very slow process. It's meant for archival, and it runs after the fact, after you get the content into the storage, and it doesn't work with any cloud storage. That requires proprietary storage on-prem. So what we have is a very different spin on deduplication. It's called front-end deduplication technology, which will reduce the amount of bytes that you have to transfer. So rather than talk about it abstractly, let's take a look at it in the context of a Photoshop document. So since we work with every type of media content, whether it's video or graphics or motion graphics, let's take a look at, let's say I wanted to make some changes to this Photoshop file. So I could come in here and make a small change. Maybe I don't like that dolphin logo. I go ahead and save the content, go back into my plugin, which notices that things have changed. I just have to click sync and it'll collect everything in this project. There might be 2000 elements or links, it doesn't really matter. And this works across all the Adobe CC apps. It brings a custom check-in form, metadata dialog. And when I hit check-in, it changes, it tracks the changes that need to be sent to the server. So if you look at this number, it's uploading around 5 kilobytes. Versus if I look at the actual file, the file is much larger. It's 18 megabytes. So we have reduced over 99% of the bytes that needed to be sent from my desktop to the cloud server. That is front-end deduplication. It's operating at a file level, not at a block level like storage does. And why is that so critical? Because this technology, by the way, is agnostic to file type. You could be exporting a QuickTime animation from After Effects, or you might be exporting something from Adobe Media Encoder, or even Avid. It doesn't really matter. It's operating at a binary level. So what it did was it reduced the amount of bytes that needed to be transferred. So this is a more dramatic example. Instead of 18 gigabyte, if I had a 50 gigabyte video that I was exporting because my producer asked for some changes, we might be just uploading a megabyte. There is no file acceleration product that can do better than this, because we have reduced at source how many bytes that need to be transferred. And it might take me a second to transfer 1 megabyte, even with a really bad internet connection. Versus with all the other solutions in the marketplace, I'd be looking at transferring 50 or 10 gigabytes, which could take hours. And not only that, because most of these solutions lack any sort of fault tolerance on transfers, it might take days. So this single feature is enabling thousands of our customers to be able to work remotely. This is an example of this applies to any type of file. If this was a QuickTime, you can see that I made some change. Maybe I added a title card, and I might have been able to save this in 20 kilobytes. All right, moving on. Now I've shown you ways of transferring content using our apps. There are times that you have content sitting in third-party repositories. You might have content sitting in a Google Drive or a Dropbox. So how do you easily transfer in and out and make that content accessible to your remote users, to other remote workflows that you might have? So Evolphin goes beyond the traditional tools. It also has a Zapier app. Those of you who are familiar with Zapier, it's basically an integration hub that allows applications to come together without needing any specific coding or requiring a system integrator to go and do some additional work for you. So it's a really cost-effective way of bringing things together. So for example, if I wanted to bring content from Dropbox, I could set up using a very simple user interface that Zapier and Evolphin provide, where I can set up a monitoring folder in Dropbox and say, hey, if content arrives in this directory or folder, then automatically ingest that into Evolphin. This could be images, this could be high-res media, it doesn't really matter. Once you set up this workflow, you hit start, and then it'll continuously monitor your Dropbox folder or a Google Drive folder and push content from there, from the third party into Evolphin. And that's great if you have historically been using all these other solutions. It's very easy to bring content in. And it works in the other direction too. If I had content that was sitting in the Evolphin MAM, high res or low res, I can set up reverse workflows where I can define triggers. And these are all defined using this easy UI, no programming, no XML needed. You can define the triggers that if I say this asset is tagged as published to YouTube or published to a video on demand service, Evolphin will automatically transfer the links. And that is really critical. It's not going to have to copy the entire media file because you don't want that. It will use links in the cloud service that we have and send those links over to the service securely And that way, the amount of data that needs to be transferred is minimized to just transferring the link. Moving on. So far, what we have looked at is how do I get content in and out through a human process where I'm dragging content into a repository, or I'm transferring content from other sources. But what if you were just starting out and you said you have tons of content sitting in archive on-prem locations, and you are working remotely because of the COVID situation. So how do you get all that high-res media in a store where it can be easily accessed? A lot of companies might say, why don't you just VPN in and access the content, or set up a remote file share? And towards the end of this webinar, I'll talk about why those approaches don't work. But one solution is you use our secure data box service, where we have streamlined this entire process, where you will receive a secure data box device that is tamper-proof. You can copy your content from multiple drives, etc., into this, and that gets shipped to the Evolphin cloud. And once it reaches there overnight, we can automatically ingest the content sitting in these data box and bring it into Evolphin MAM. And that would be high-res content. And you can optionally trigger AI processes on all of those. Now, as soon as we ingest the content, it's instantly accessible to you at your home computer or in the field. You don't even have to wait for the transcoding to finish. And that's a key part of our workflow, that we optimize how soon the content is accessible without any other processes that are running in the background blocking it. So this is one way. The other way is...
Rahul, excuse me, just before you move on, could you share with the audience how long this process might take?
Yeah, the secure data box process, it takes basically an overnight to ship it to you, and then you might take a few days to copy. Once you copy, let's say it takes you 4 days to copy 40, 50 terabytes, depending upon your storage speed, and then ship it back. It will be couple of days after which the content would show up in the Evolphin MAM. So you could transfer hundreds of terabytes in matter of days, or probably less than a week, and start using that content. So this is great for bulk transfer when it's not practical to use the internet to try to rsync or to transfer the content over into the cloud solution. Now, what if you didn't want to use the data box? You wanted to leave the content wherever it is on-prem. That's where our hybrid approach comes along. So instead of doing this transfer, we could go and index the content on-prem and also make a copy of that high-res into the cloud. Now, you will see a lot of solutions talk about hybrid, but what they often don't tell you is they want the media, the high-res, to stay on-prem, because they don't have tools to transfer the high-res into the cloud. They don't have the cost control to reduce the storage cost of high-res. So they will discourage you. They will say, hey, why don't you just copy the proxies in the cloud? But that doesn't really help you, because eventually you might want to do a remote conform, and those won't be possible if you don't have the high-res media in the cloud to start with. Now, either way, whether you are bringing a secure data box through our cloud service or using our on-prem tool to migrate content, before you start any kind of data migration, you need to have a good view of what exists in all these storages. So this is where our automated crawlers come in. We are the only solution that provides these crawls that basically will, like a spider, go through all your storages, whether they are on-prem or in the cloud. And this is before even you set up the service or get started with Evolphin MAM. So these crawlers will then extract the kind of information you need to make decisions and come up with a realistic plan for data migration. So you might have 0.5 petabyte of content in various storage silos and cloud, but does all of that need to be in the MAM indexed? Maybe not. You might have 25% of your content sitting as duplicates. People are used to copying from one episode to another. And so out of that 400 terabytes, perhaps 100 terabyte is duplicate. So what these reports will do is, once the crawl is done, and this is, by the way, highly automated process, you set up the crawler, and you forget about it, you schedule that it runs from 5 p.m. to, let's say, 7 a.m. in the morning. It is designed to have minimal storage impact. So while you're using your production storages at office or you're using your cloud storages, it's going to consume like less than 1% of storage bandwidth. And it'll generate reports like you see here. For example, this report gives me a view of what are the distribution of video codecs. I might have ProRes, I might have other codecs, but till I have a view into this, I don't know what sort of transcoding do I want. And especially if you're dealing with historical content that's been sitting around for years, it's often very difficult for media managers to really give a straight answer that what type of codecs do I have? And it could be audio codec, resolutions. So you might think you only have 720p content, but when you run a report like this, it might come back with, oh, I have like 32% of my content as 4K. Bitrate distribution, you might think you have low bitrate footages, but this report is showing you have 86% of your content at 50 megabits per second or more. This is another report on the left that shows you the distribution of file types. When we do this, a lot of customers would say, I think I probably have 60, 70 formats and file type. We run our crawler and we find 500 of these, and they're surprised to see so many different media types. And the reason is over time, you can collect a lot of media and from a variety of sources. And so all of these analytics then help you come to basically a decision on, for example, the transcoding estimate. One of the most costliest thing in the cloud is the transcoding. Or even if you're setting up an on-prem transcoding farm, what sort of hardware do I need to purchase? Do I need a 32-core GPU accelerated hardware, or do I need 64-core? Those decisions can be made even before you start working with the MAM. So we have calculators that will take all this analytics and stats that are coming out. And for instance, this is a customer, a football club in Europe. We found out they had 21,000 hours of footage on their archived NAS. And based on the cores, based on the processing power, our calculator said that it'll take you 4,000 hours to transcode. And similarly on the cloud, we were able to scan the S3 buckets. And again, and this is done without copying any content. This is a very efficient process. So the customers can then make an informed decision on the transcode cost, on the storage cost, based on the file type reports and formats. You might say, out of those 500, I only care about 20 of these file types. So Evolphin, can you set up migration where you ignore rest of them? And that would cut down on the amount of storage that is needed when you migrate. The other key part of this is dealing with image sequences. And a lot of times people forget that. Today, we find people use motion graphics tool to create animation. And often this is totally lost during implementation of a map. So we are one of the only solution that deals with that. If you don't do image sequences or motion graphics today, maybe you would do this in the future. But let me just show you what that really means. So unlike traditional solutions where if I had an image sequence, so let me take this image sequence that was generated from Cinema 4D. So if you look at this image sequence, I have a single file in the MAM, and it has this image sequence icon, and it's telling me that this is linked with hundreds or thousands of frames. If I click on this, it shows me all the frames that exist. So the key point here is we are ingesting a single image sequence object, but linking it with thousands of image frames. And that is a key difference from other implementations. They will potentially ingest thousands of frame images as individual files. What that will mean is it'll clutter your search. When you search, you will see thousands of images that all look like this NASCAR image. So you won't be able to do a meaningful search. It'll also increase the amount of storage that you use in the cloud or on-prem and amount of time it takes to transfer. So using a data migration tool, it goes beyond the traditional file types, but it also deals with image sequences. Now, once you have the data crawled, then our data migration tool comes in. This data migration tool is designed to basically be very easy to use using a GUI. And a couple of things that it does that are different from anything that is out there is batch control. Now, everybody in the MAM world can tell you that, yeah, just drag a folder full of content and bring it into the MAM and we will ingest it. But data migration with batch control is different. You might have millions of files, or you might have 100,000 files broken up into tons of folders. And what this does is it does data consistent batch transfer. So it breaks up your huge folder structure into batches and ingest them as atomic or basically transactional batches. So when it says a batch is done, it guarantees that the metadata is in, the files are in, and you would have no loss of data. And importantly, it will detect any duplicates, whether they are in the MAM or on the physical disk or in the cloud like S3, it will detect duplicates and will create smart objects in the MAM to detect, to deal with those duplicates. And even on the storage, it can create shortcuts so that all those duplicates you have historically are gone, and you are left with just the master asset. And that is critical if you have historically been using the workflow where you copy from season to season, episode to episode, or project to project. Now, this whole batch management and the transfer tool that we have is fault resistance. So if you were to stop this or kill this data migration window, there's no issue. It will track where you were before and will automatically resume. Without that, you really can do a large data migration project without spending tons of time and expense. And this is designed that any customer, once they have licensed our data migration tool, they can run this themselves. So net, the workflow is whether you have content archived in on-prem storage, LTO tapes, cloud storage, our crawler will do our content analysis, figure out what needs to be migrated, give you reports, and that will feed into our batch migrator that would run in the cloud on-prem, and that will then bring the content quickly into the cloud map. Right, so now once you have the content, what can you do with it, especially with regards to remote conform? So this is a buzzword that we are hearing more and more, remote conforms. Now, what remote conform means is you might be working from home and you might be using proxies to create your edit decision list in Premiere or other NLE. But when the time comes for you to do your final export, it may take you a while to get hold of the high-res media wherever it is. So instead of bringing the high-res media down to your workstation, you can have a process or a job triggered in the cloud to do a remote conform. And there are really two options here. To do a remote conform in the cloud, you need a Windows-based workstation because Macs don't run in the cloud, at least not till now. So you need a GPU accelerated workstation, and most of the solutions that do remote conform rely on basically like a watch folder. So we can work with Adobe Media Encoder for Adobe, where it has a watch folder, and if you drop a Premiere project or an After Effects project, it can pick it up and do a render in the cloud. Now that is great, but what we find in practice is most editors want to have tight control over the final delivery. So they don't want automation in the cloud to automatically create the high-res and send it to a video on demand or a digital master control, because then editors have lost all control. So you can have best of both worlds. With our solution, you can do remote conform in the cloud, but you can also attach a PC over IP client. And there are many out there. Amazon has a client called AWS Workspace. So you can attach a PC over IP client and monitor that remote conform. Solutions that basically say that PC over IP client don't work do not realize that in the end, all remote conform require a workstation in the cloud. Whether you connect a remote client like a PC over IP or you have a job queue, it always gets transported and exported in the cloud using a Windows workspace. Now with a PC over IP client, an editor could have access to all the tools in the cloud workspace, Premiere, etc., and they can check the job, they can check if the colors are accurate and things like that. Now, this is made possible because of our hub architecture. A lot of solutions that shy away from PC over IP client, the reason is that they don't have any way of accessing that high-res media easily from within, let's say, Premiere running in the cloud. Because Evolphin has this accelerated hub architecture, you can drop this hub even in a cloud workspace, and it will be responsible for pulling high-res media wherever it is on Amazon S3 and making it easily accessible to the cloud instance. Right, so we have looked at so far best practices on what to do, how to bring in content either automatically, and how to basically use the data migration tool. In this final section, we are going to take a look at things that you should not do because the result won't be great. So let's start with the first one here, which is streaming proxies. So these have been touted as the Nirvana solution where you're working from home, and it would be so great to just stream a low-res proxy or even a high-res media file directly from the cloud. So here is where the issues are. So number one, the cloud storage that is cost effective is called object storage. And that is often 10x cheaper than any other cloud storage. So you want most of your media to be in this S3 like storage or Google object storage and so on and so forth. But the problem with these storages, since there is no such thing as a free lunch, these storages are extremely slow with regards to latency. So for example, Amazon will not guarantee you the latency that you will see when you make calls into this S3 storage. Typically, we see like 200 millisecond latency, which is like you are working in Singapore and trying to access content in New York. That's the kind of latency these have. And since this is unpredictable, the latencies can sometimes even go into seconds. There is no guarantee on that. So what does that mean? If you have a true streaming solution, it will lead to lags and drop frames and stutter, and that is not great for editing. The other problem with a true streaming solution, if it really existed, would be the egress cost. So every time you streamed from the cloud, you would have to pay the egress cost. And many of these solutions don't care because they want you to bring your own cloud. So they're not footing the bill, you are. So you would get surprises in your AWS bill. And what is this data transfer item in there? Oh, that's because of all the egress cost. So customers are often caught unawares when they see that bill. But since we are a solution provider that hosts directly in the cloud, we need to do those cost controls. So it's our duty to inform you about all these costs. The other problem with this approach, a true streaming approach, is offline editing. So how many times have you had issues where connections went down, internet was spotty, or you were working from a remote location or in the field? So with a true streaming solution, you won't be able to do offline editing. And often these solutions are designed to work with very specific set of NLEs like Adobe Premiere and maybe perhaps with After Effects. But what we find is in many workflows, people use variety of tools. They might be using Media Composer, they might be using DaVinci Resolve, and often there are no plugins to do streaming into those. And the high-res, that's not even an option. If you try to do this with high-res media, that would be so slow that you would give up. So how do these solutions that talk about streaming proxies then deal with that? So they come up with the following workarounds. They actually do not do true streaming. They start to use caching. So for example, some solutions which would put a local disk cache in front of your Premiere editing tool. And these local disk cache are used to alleviate the pain of direct streaming. But that defeats the purpose of streaming proxy in the first place, which was not to cache, not to download anything on the local workstation. The other problem is since the S3 or the cloud storage APIs are very slow and the solutions don't want to deal with the latency, and it's not easy to deal with that, they also end up committing this worst sin, which is copy all this high-risk content into expensive storage like EBS block storage. And this can be like 10x or 4x the cost of S3. So now what you have is a solution that purports to be streaming proxies or media, but it has two caches, one in the cloud and one on the local disk. So A, you haven't really solved anything. Your content is not any more secure. Files are still cached locally and can be accessed by editors. And you also have huge cloud costs. So beware of approaches that talk about streaming proxies. The other approach that we often see touted is remote file system driver. So the idea is that on my workstation, whether I'm working with a server in the office like NAS or SAN, or in the cloud, it would be so cool to have a file driver that can talk to storages anywhere and allow me to access high-res media or low-res proxy easily from this remote workstation. So the problem with all these approaches is they rely on an open source module called Fuse. And you can look it up, you can Google it. Fuse is used universally by many remote drive solutions. Even Google Drive, if you mount it, uses Fuse. And the problem with Fuse historically has been that it leads to crashes on your operating system. We had a recent customer, they had started using one of these drive solutions, and every day their Mac OS Catalina was crashing because the interaction between the file system and the OS can be very unpredictable when the OS upgrades. The other problem with this solution is risking file corruption. So when you use a drive, it also has to deal with the lags of remote office or remote cloud storage. So they start to basically cache, and data can be inconsistent. So you might say, I've saved the Premiere project, but the data hasn't really reached the office or the cloud storage. And in that case, if something bad happens, like the connection goes down or your computer restarts, you might have file corruption. And the egress costs are also going to be extremely high if you truly started to stream high-res media. Some of these solutions we are seeing are touting access to high-res media using this Fuse-based driver. And that will lead to, again, high streaming cost unless they start caching. And if they start caching, it kind of defeats the purpose of the solution. So that's the problem with a file system driver approach. And by the way, this file system driver approach is not really vendor specific. On the net, you can find there are tons of remote file system driver that work with variety of cloud storages. So you can use them with any MAM. These are not really any innovations from the MAM vendor. They are available to you today, but we have a lot of experience dealing with the latency, etc. So best practice dictates that you stay away from that. And finally, let's talk about the last point here, which is trying to use a solution that only works through a web client. So what's the problem with using a web client or a web browser for transferring large media files? So I said at the start of my talk that typical MAM talk about dealing with all file types, but really they mean finished content and not raw media type, not image sequences. And the reason for that is when you try to transfer large amount of files into the cloud, the folder structure that you have these files in, a lot of the web browsers don't deal with folder structure, web browser client. They can deal with large files. If the files are over 4 GB and you navigate away from the page or close the tab, the transfer can be interrupted and you have to restart again. Pause resume is really a big challenge with a lot of these tools. So therefore, using just a pure web browser for uploading directly from the computer is not really going to work out. So our recommendation is to use solutions that have purpose-built uploaders. So for example, our HTML5 uploader can deal with everything. It can deal with sequences, high-res media, it can deal with folder structure. And we have solutions where you can drop things into a Amazon S3 bucket and have it ingested. I showed that at the beginning of my talk. And that allows you to easily overcome the 4 GB barrier. You can go and ingest hundreds of gigabytes or terabyte using a web browser technology. But not, if the solution hasn't thought about that, then it's not going to work. And especially persistent transfer, that is key, because you could be transferring a camera card with bazillion clips. You don't want to end up with 20% of the clips transferred and some partially, and then the transfer failed. So with that, I come to the end of this presentation. And if you have any questions, we can take them now.
Rahul, thank you for thanks for doing that. Very grateful. Folks, your questions are very welcome, and we'll do our very best to answer those. But Rahul, I do have some questions in the queue which I'd like to share with you right now. You've talked a lot about AWS in this this demo. What about other cloud providers? You know, who else can we work with?
So technically, we can be deployed in any cloud like Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure Cloud. But just to be clear, there are advantages of using the AWS cloud. We're not being paid by Amazon to say this, but they have thought through some of the large media transfer issues through their SDK APIs a lot better. So for instance, there are solutions that are Google Cloud-based, but Google, for example, doesn't support an API that would allow parallel multi-part transfers with persistence, with ability to pause and resume. Because that feature doesn't exist, so solutions that use GCP can take advantage of that. And that means it's not going to be feasible for them to bring high-res media into the cloud, no matter what they say.
Thanks. Rahul, folks, this is the subject of another webinar. Which will be, focused on security. But Rahul, one of the attendees has asked a question: can we watermark proxies for security purposes?
Yes, absolutely. You can. Evolphin has a very flexible converter framework that when the proxies are transcoded, you can supply any image from the MAM, or you can upload an image, and that would be watermarked into the low-res proxies.
Okay, and again, in the same vein, how do we keep track, and how do we log who is actually accessing content in the cloud?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Security is often an afterthought with a lot of the MAM solution. So we've architected a solution that will basically comply with the various privacy laws. And we have audit trails on every access that's done to the content. If you use a single sign-on solution like Microsoft Azure AD or Okta, etc., we are probably the only MAM that I know that uses the new protocol called OpenID Connect. And that allows you to obtain consent from users if you're sharing a collection. And without obtaining those consents, you would be in violation of GDPR and other laws. And that's a problem with older technologies. Like there's a technology called SAML, which was used historically for single sign-on. And if you look at most of the solutions, they're based off SAML, and it doesn't provide user consent out of the box. So you would not be able to cover that unless you have a solution like ours, which integrates with the OpenID Connect protocol.
Rahul, I've got some sales folk on the call, and I'm grateful that they joined this. But I've got a question. Just think we're in a sales situation on site with a customer, and a customer says to you or to me, you know what, all this stuff's really interesting, but when it comes down to it, the cost of storing high-res content in the cloud, the time it takes to get there, etc., that's a problem for us. So when somebody gives us that sort of objection, what's our response going to be?
Yep. So that has been the traditional problem with MAM. They all talk about remote and cloud workflows, but like I've kind of made the point during this webinar, they all shy away from solving the problem. How do I securely get my high-res media securely and efficiently and as fast as possible without requiring tons of third-party integrations? And once I get it into the cloud, how do I keep my cost down? So the way we have done that, there are a couple of things that we have done. So first of all, any high-res media, it never touches the block storage in the cloud, which is basically like poison because it's so costly. With many of these solutions, the transcoding technologies, the edge transcoders, etc., they use require the media to also be copied to a block storage before they can act on it. Not with us. We can go stream directly from the lower cost tier like S3. So that's a fundamental architecture that we have, which allows us to work very efficiently with media in true object storage. The second is our archive solution, which is a topic for another webinar, has automatic retention rules where content can transition from one tier to another. So you might have 400 terabytes that you bought in as part of the migration. It goes into Amazon S3, but you might not need all of that content right away. So you might want to set up interesting rules that if the metadata matches this show, if I'm working on season XYZ, then I need this live in the nearline S3 storage, but everything else should be transitioned to Glacier Deep Archive, which is a fraction of the cost of the storage. So we will manage all those transitions automatically versus other solutions that will make it your problem. I cannot tell you how many solutions will use the term bring your own storage, which is really saying, hey, customer, you solve the technical problem of managing the cost. You move the content into various tiers. But what if you did that? Say you had a S3 archive with 250 terabytes and you moved a bunch of it into Deep Glacier. In order to restore it out of that S3, it requires some very specific workflows and API. And if the MAM solution doesn't have that, then you as a media manager would be responsible for moving in and out. And that's just not scalable.
Rahul, thanks for that. Just a message to everybody. We've given a huge amount of thought to the detail here, and we've built technology that is its objective is to reduce, eliminate, the sort of issues, the devilish details, and just sort of make a deployment, a much better process for you. Rahul, I wish I could answer this question, but I can't. You said that we're cloud native, and especially when it comes to deployments. And the question is, do you support containerized deployments on things like Kubernetes, OpenShift, for example?
Yeah, that's a very technical question. Probably.
That's why I couldn't answer it.
IT-minded would ask that. So there are two parts to it. Why does it matter, and do we do that? Yes, we support microservices architecture. We also support container-based deployment using technologies like Docker. But we actually go one step further. The whole reason this whole container-based approach was touted by these cloud provider is to actually suck more money out of the solution. The reason is you have to pay by usage. So if you, for example, start using a database service that is a microservice, every minute or hour you use, you have to pay the cloud provider. And the cost for these pay as you go is often 60–70% higher than reserving an instance. So we have architected our solution in such a way where we haven't just drowned ourselves in the buzzword of using everything through the cloud provider. So there are some entities like database. We have a NoSQL database that runs on a reserved instance. That means no per hour cost, no backup cost. We manage that very efficiently. And that may mean 70–80% reduction in the cloud overall computing cost. So we did an estimate once where we felt if we did this microservice architecture in the way that often other people do, the cost of operating a solution could be tens or twenties of thousands of dollars more per annum versus how we've architected our microservices.
Well, thank you. I have one more question for you before I conclude. But do we have plans in the future to support FCPX libraries?
So we do support Final Cut Pro through, that's probably something we'll address in a future webinar. We can generate sequences which are FCP XML compliant, so you can bring content into Final Cut Pro. And then the other thing that we'll cover probably in a future webinar too is we have plugins into Mac Finder. So even though we don't have a panel inside Final Cut Pro like Adobe, using the Finder plugin that we have will allow you to work with any tool, including FCP, and pull content or push content out of that.
Rahul, very quickly, connectors for agile project management tools like Jira.
Yeah, so that's a really important one. A lot of customers have project management solutions, whether it's Jira or Asana or Right. And if you recollect during this webinar, I showed you the Zapier integration hub that we have. And that allows us to work with all these popular project management, task management solutions. And you can do some interesting workflows, again, without any customization needed. You can set up workflows where when you create a project or a task in Asana, you could trigger something in Evolphin to create a project folder. Or the other way around, if you have some content that was published and a link needs to be now updated into a task, you can set that up. So historically, this has required some custom integration, but using that Zapier approach, this can be automated easily.
Rahul, thank you. I'm going to leave it there and just conclude. Thank you for doing this presentation and for carrying the bulk of the load of actually delivering it. And folks, I want to say thank you to each of you for joining the webinar. We really do appreciate it. We hope that you learned some important things today. I would encourage you to take a look at our website, in particular the resources page. You will see on there some webinars that we've already done, especially around artificial intelligence, around Adobe. But I would encourage you to take a look at what's coming up next, because we've got some really interesting webinars where we'll work with Zendata and we'll talk about archive. We're going to do a really exciting webinar with Telestream and their Vantage product and how that workflow for the remote user works. We've talked a little bit about security today, but we are going to do a webinar about best practices for securing media and access to that media in the remote workflow. There will be a more business-focused webinar coming up about user adoption. I hope we've shared with you today that we can make the technology do just about anything. But the fact of the matter is that if users don't want to use it, and there's a plethora of reasons for why that might be the case, then it's going to the project is going to fail. There will be expense that will be wasted, etc. So that's going to be particularly interesting. And in the same vein, there is an upcoming webinar that will focus on how we can minimize cloud costs for the remote workflow. So they're all geared to share best practices with you and to give you things to think about as you consider options for your asset management going forward. But on that note, very grateful that you took the time to join us this morning. We're happy to answer any questions after this event. And again, thank you, Rahul. Really grateful for your knowledge in this area and for presenting the material. Everybody have a really great day. Please be safe. And I look forward to joining you again on an upcoming webinar. Take care.